100% okay, sir.
Right. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. We, the PG and Research Department of Political Science, Sri Keralavarma College, Thrissur, is very pleased to welcome you all to this international webinar.
ശ്രീരേഖ ശ്രീരേഖ വോയിസ് കേൾക്കുന്നില്ലല്ലോ, ഒന്ന് അടുത്ത് പിടിച്ച് പറയൂ.
Am I audible?
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. We, the PG and Research Department of Political Science, Sri Keralavarma College, Thrissur, is very pleased to welcome you all to the
കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല.
international webinar series conducted as a part of celebrating 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. It is an irresistible fact that Gandhi has played a highly relevant role in the freedom struggle of India. His ideologies of truth and non-violence have influenced large number of people and was also adopted by leaders like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela for their freedom movement. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is widely recognized as one of the greatest political and spiritual leaders of the 20th century and honored in India as the father of nations. In these times of perishing democratic and political values, we realize that it is a necessary and crucial step to revisit and reinforce his messages and ideologies. Today, Sri M.P Joseph sir will take this webinar concentrated on the topic Mahatma Gandhi, a national and global icon for the 20th century
आवाज बच सकते हैं.
beyond. Our webinar will be chaired by Dr. C.R. Pramod, our Honorable HOD of Political Science, Sri Keralavarma College. Let me heartily welcome Pramod sir. And I am very delightful to welcome our Chief Guest, Sri M.P Joseph sir, for the key talk. And I am using this opportunity to introduce him to you a little bit. Sri M.P Joseph has been in various designations like former IAS and UN official, former Labour Commissioner of Kerala, and former Advisor of Labour and Industrial Reforms in the rank of Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Kerala. Warm welcome, sir.
Thank you.
After the key talk, we will also having a discussion session in which any of you can participate. And finally, for the vote of time, we will having our dear friend Maria Zani with us. I warmly welcome her also to the program. And I am very happily welcome all participators and audience to this international webinar. Welcome all. And I would like to hand over the mic to Dr. C.R. Pramod, our HOD, to share the webinar. Pramod sir, please.
Very good evening to you all. Dr. Pramod is not able to connect now. In the absence of him, myself, I preside over this function. Famous American writer Perles Burke once stated that he was right. He knew he was right. We all knew he was right. The man who killed him knew he was right. However, long the failures of the violent continue. They but prove that Gandhi was right. Resist to the very end, he said. But without violence, the world is sick. O India, dare to be worthy of your Gandhi. We all know that today is celebrating as International Day on Non-Violence. In all over the world, on this day, there are different webinars and other programs are going on. The Department of Political Science Sri Keralavarma College is also organizing an international webinar series starting from today, and second webinar is likely to planned held on 9th October. So, in this occasion, we have a right person to share about Gandhi. So, I heartily welcome Sri M.P Joseph sir to this function. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe that was Arun, isn't it? Arun
Yes,
is
sir.
just
Yes, sir.
talking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, Arun. Good evening, Pramod, who's head of the department. Um, Good evening, everybody else who's listening in. Uh, Let me firstly congratulate Arun, uh, Dr. Pramod, and everybody else of the Kerala Varma College, Trishur, for holding this webinar series. I believe its focus is on democracy. And what better day to start this than Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary? Uh, he was born, I don't have to tell you, 100, a century and a half ago in 1869. And his birthday is being celebrated all across the world as the International Day of Nonviolence. Very appropriately, I would say. Uh, and therefore, it is most pertinent that on this day, when there's growing violence across the world, growing violence in India and across the world, Kerala Varma College and the Department of Political Science should have chosen Mahatma Gandhi himself as the subject of the first webinar. There can be no greater symbol of either non-violence or of democracy than Mahatma Gandhi himself. And therefore, I'm personally very honored and I feel humbled to have been asked to speak at this inaugural webinar. Thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I'll be able to justify your choice as the inaugural speaker of the series. When Arun and the college asked me to speak on the theme of Mahatma Gandhi, and they asked me what I would like to speak on, I said I would like to speak on Mahatma Gandhi as a national and global icon for the 2020s and beyond. Gandhiji was born a century and a half ago, and he died uh, 72 years ago, 73, nearly 73 years ago. But even today, in the 2020s, he's extremely pertinent. Perhaps he's more pertinent today than he was many, many years ago. And therefore, I thought I'd speak on his pertinence today, not only within the country, but globally across the world, for the youngsters, how pertinent he is and how he is perhaps an antidote to everything that we see around us that may be going wrong. Generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, in flesh and blood, ever walked upon this earth. That was Einstein who said this many, many years ago, I think about 80 or 90 years ago. And he was speaking of Mahatma Gandhi. The generations to come, and I'm sure youngsters listening to me, the students of the Kerala Varma College and others, would be scarcely believing that somebody like this who focused and practiced nonviolence to a T, and who would not be, even under the greatest of temptations, move away from his path of ahimsa and nonviolence, lived on this earth in flesh and blood. He was not God. He never claimed he was a, nobody said, he never claimed he was an incarnation of God. He was just a human being like you and me. And yet he was able to do something that was completely different from all of us. So the words of Albert Einstein, much more valid and relevant today than when he said it uh, nearly a century ago. Even for people like me, who lived in a more tolerant world of the 1980s, 1990s, and even in the first decade of the 21st century, first find it difficult to believe that the Mahatma is real. So for the young today who see the cruelty, the killing, the hate, the evil that many leaders in the world are openly propagating, encouraging. And do think that, and therefore, I cannot blame our youngsters if they should think that that is how the world was, always is, and will always be. And for them, a character, a person like Mahatma Gandhi would be straight out of a historical fiction or a movie and not a real person in flesh and blood. Therefore, in this sharply divided world of 2020 that is being torn apart in all possible ways you can think, it's impossible to imagine that somebody like Gandhiji is possible, was possible, that he indeed in flesh and blood walked upon this earth. That seems highly improbable, but yet it is true. And what was this that made him such an unbelievable human being? It is his focus on non-violence, on ahimsa. And today, as we celebrate the International Day of Non-Violence, I think it's important to realize that for Gandhi, non-violence or ahimsa was an eternal tool. It was not a one-off thing that he used to get the British out of India, which of course he did. But for him, it was an eternal tool, a tool beyond time, a tool beyond borders. And that is why it is as relevant today. The tool of ahimsa, the tool of non-violence, is as relevant today as it was 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and will be as relevant today as it will, and it will be as relevant 100 years from now, 150, 200, 300 years, a millennium down the line, as long as sapiens exist, as long as human beings exist. Gandhiji's fundamental principle was ahimsa because he believed that it was an eternal tool. India, I mean, ahimsa is not something that Mahatma Gandhi discovered or invented for himself. India was never new to ahimsa. Gautama Buddha based his fundamentals on a whole religion. Buddhism was built on ahimsa, non-violence. And so did the Jain Munis, who went to the extent of even avoiding killing insects and ants and small creatures, and even, bacteria and the things that you can't even see. And then we had in India kings who ruled based themselves on ahimsa. King Ashoka turned to non-violence and ahimsa and to Buddhism to clear his conscience after the death and the blood and the gore of the Kalinga War. So ahimsa is not new to India. We always, it was a part of the Indian mindset. It was a part of the Indian genes. It was a part of the Indian ethos. And neither is non-violence new to the world. 2000 years ago, Christ asked us to turn the other cheek. He said, it is not enough to love your neighbor. Any murderer, any terrorist, any killer, any can love his neighbor. That is so difficult. That's what Christ said 2000 years ago. So it's not a new philosophy. So from the times when people spoke about an eye for an eye, the ideal of ahimsa was always there in our blood. But it was never practiced the way Mahatma Gandhi practiced it. Non-violence was always seen as something between an individual and another. You hit me on my cheek, I turn the other cheek. The Good Samaritan, helping people, individuals in distress. What Mahatma Gandhi did was to turn this philosophy, this ethos of non-violence, basically an ethos of to be practiced between individuals and individuals, into something to be practiced between nations, between country and country, between communities and community. Nations have always thought that it was war which would decide outcomes. Wars were used to throw off, to conquer, to throw off conquering countries and tribes and communities and nations. It was used to throw off even oppressive regimes. Violence between nations and within groups and within factions of a country was always met with violence. An eye for an eye always reigned between nations, between communities, between groups of people. But it was the Mahatma who translated this ideal, which was then generally largely practiced between individuals, into something much more between nations. For Mahatma, therefore, Gandhi, therefore, ahimsa or non-violence was not simply a theoretical creed. It was to be practiced at all levels. It was to be practiced between individuals, between families, between villages, between towns, between cities, between kingdoms, and between countries. For Mahatma Gandhi, therefore, it was a tool. It was a very practical tool, one that he incessantly used, as in his own words, as a weapon against the British, and was able to throw the British out. There are such contradictions in the terms that Mahatma Gandhi used. A weapon. How can nonviolence be a weapon? A weapon is by definition something violent. But Mahatma Gandhi was able to use words of violence that we normally associate it with into words of peace. Non-violence as a weapon of peace. Non-violence as a weapon against oppression. These are positive contradictions, I would say, that Mahatma Gandhi gave us through his life and the message he sort of bequeathed to us. When the rest of the cynical world today, as in, for those of you who have read George Orwell's 1984 in Animal Farm, used such words in a completely different manner. They would use the word peace to camouflage war and violence. For example, a department devoted to war and killing would be called the Ministry of Peace. An army meant for attacking neighbors and killing would be called the Ministry of Defense, which was really the Ministry of Offense. The Ministry of Peace was really the Ministry of War. Gandhiji did the opposite. He used these words which were normally associated with violence to associating them with peace and non-violence. He used words associated with violence to blunt violence and to take peace forward. So a weapon for him was not a weapon of violence, as we would normally associate with, but an instrument of peace, but a weapon of peace. He was therefore, if it's possible, the opposite of a cynic. And by an opposite of a cynic, I don't mean an optimist, but an anti-cynic, if you will. Something for him, cynicism did not exist. So that is what the fundamental principle, that the fundamental ethos, the fundamental message that Mahatma has bequeathed to us. And those are, even today, in the 2020s and beyond, as relevant to the world and to the global community and to India as it was a century and a half ago. For those of you youngsters who might think that Gandhiji was born a Mahatma, no, he was not. He was born like you. He was born like me. For he was one of 4 children of a Diwan of Porbandar and Kathiawar, who later became a Diwan in Rajkot. A Diwan, as you know, is something like a chief minister, an appointed chief minister, not an elected chief minister. Was fairly in the upper class, upper middle class, may not be as rich as Jawaharlal Nehru or Motilal Nehru and the others, but certainly very well-off middle class family. And it was he, such a person like you and me, who gave up all those, sacrificed all those, and threw them all out, and slowly became what we call him today, a Mahatma. But that journey for him was not an easy journey. It was a baptism by fire. In South Africa, I don't have to tell you, he was called a coolie in a train. He was asked why he's a coolie sitting in a first-class compartment. A first-class compartment was not reserved for Indians or browns or blacks, it was for white people. And so in 1893, when he had, after passing and the Bharat Law degree in London, all of 24 years of age, like most of you, when he was thrown out of that train in Peter Maritzburg in South Africa, it was a it was a moment of epiphany for him. It was a moment of revelation for him. He realized that there was so much hate in the world, so much of looking down upon others in the world. People different from us, people wearing different clothes, people different language, different color, not as white as somebody else, not as brown as somebody else, not as black as somebody else. The difference, he realized, led to hate. And then I suppose when he was lying on that platform, thrown out of a train, that was perhaps when he realized that hate is evil. And more importantly, I think as he lay there, helpless on that station platform in South Africa, he realized how helpless individuals like him, like you, like me, like the downtrodden, the marginalized, the poor, the Dalits, how helpless individuals are over an evil state, an evil governance, an evil system of ruling, a system of administration. He realized that against the violence of the organized state, the individual is helpless. That was when perhaps he realized that that for a helpless person, for a helpless individual, or even a helpless country or a helpless nation, you cannot win over evil with evil. That you cannot win violence with violence. That the violence of the organized state, that the violence of the oppressor, the violence of the stronger would be a far greater violence than your violence or my violence or the violence of an individual. That the only way you can beat violence, as Buddha said, as a Jain Muni said, as Ashoka realized, was to beat was only through non-violence. That you can beat Hinsa with ahimsa. Perhaps that realization must have dawned on that young 24-year-old young Gandhi when he lay there. That message, which happened so many years ago, a century and a quarter years ago in South Africa, that realization, that is a message for modern times, for the 2020s and beyond, for because it's an eternal message. It's a message that reverberates even more in the 2020s and beyond. That the response to violence is not violence. That the response to violence is non-violence. That's not the message of a mere theorist, but it's a message of a pragmatist. A pragmatist who realized that your violence can never be as strong as the violence of your oppressor. And he also realized that non-violence is a million times, a zillion times stronger than any violence can be. Because ultimately, it is the mind that rules the hand. It is the pen that's mightier than sword. It is non-violence that is a million times stronger than violence. He was a pragmatist, Mahatma, who showed that it's not just in theory that you can throw out kingdoms, a kingdom where the sun never set, with the power of that non-violence. So it is a message not of a coward, not of one who withdraws from the battle. It's a message of a karma yogi, a message that is politically and internationally different from what we were all used to till Mahatma Gandhi came and showed us that pragmatist message. It was the message of a brave heart, a person who had such strong will that he could win over guns and lathis and jails, and stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron walls a cage. A prison is what you create within yourself. So that is the message that he gave us, that the only way that you can meet and win over violence is with non-violence. That only ahimsa can win over himsa. It is then a message that is very relevant to us today in India and globally. That is the only means of defeating violence. Non-violence is the only sure means of defeating violence. He was the pragmatist in him. As he became a leader not merely of India but a leader of the world, he realized that he had to identify himself with the very people he was fighting for. And what amazed me when I saw that movie Gandhi, and I would recommend that all those youngsters who have not seen the movie should see the movie, was the way he changed himself to become one with those whom he fought for, those for whom he fought for. If you simply, I mean, there were many issues that you can pick up in that movie that show Gandhi in this light. But merely look at his dress styles as he progressed in this road of ahimsa, and you can understand what I mean. Studying in London, having joined the bar there in the inner temple, he was he was dressed in suit and boot, top hat and coat and all. And then when he reached South Africa, he slowly started abandoning one of them and started this his new philosophy of ahimsa, of satyagraha, pining for the truth, agraha, pining for the truth. He started to shed his clothes one by one. He began to dress down. When leaders today dress up from the dhotis that they used to wear it into fancy Armani suits and whatnot, he did the opposite. From a youngster, as youngsters would be, dressing in the best of clothes, Mahatma slowly started to dress down. He was a rich, I mean, he was a fairly rich man, as I said, from a fairly well-off middle-class family, a family that was able to send him to London to study. Even today, we find it difficult to go to London to study. So he was well off and he could have afforded those clothes. But there's a clear progression in the way he dressed out from the time he was in London and his initial, I think, 14 years or so in South Africa. And even then, he started to wear from a suit and boot to pant and shirt, and then to dhotis, full length dhotis. And if you see photographs of Mahatma Gandhi coming down from that boat, that ship that brought back to him to India finally in 2015, I think, you will see that he had switched completely to an Indian dhoti, a full length dhoti that is worn in the way in the North Indian style, and an Indian jacket. The Western clothes had all disappeared. Soon, even that fairly sophisticated Indian jacket came off and it became a kurta. The kurta initially was a long one, which came nearly up to his knees. And then it slowly started becoming smaller and smaller. It's, it became shorter and shorter. And finally, it comes off altogether. His upper body becomes bare. And as most Indians were then, and even today, our farmers, bare chested, bare bodied, upper body bare, he became something akin to that Indian farmer. And then you will also see that his dhoti also became shorter and shorter. When you see him get down from the boat in the Bombay docks, it was Bombay then, in 1915, his dhoti was the longest one that reached up to his ankles. And then slowly it becomes more shorter and shorter. It rides up and up. It comes to the calf, it comes to the knees, it comes to the thighs. And soon it becomes as short as a lungoat, a G-string, if you will. And that is how the Indian farmers wore them, bare-chested, with a short dhoti. That is what a poor Indian farmer could afford, and that is what Gandhi, a rich barrister, son of a diwan, would wear for the rest of his life. At a time when we move from dhotis that we were wearing to pant and then to suits, uh, Gandhiji did the opposite. From suits and coats and top hats to being the half-naked, bare-chested fakir that he was described as, wearing clothes just enough to hide his nakedness. There's a message to that, in that to 2020 and beyond to our youngsters. It's a message for all of us that greatness, that leadership is never born, it is acquired. You have to reach that leadership levels step by step, step by difficult step, step by very difficult step. And Gandhi's life is a testimony that it's only through that sacrifice, identifying yourself with those whom you lead, that will make you a leader. Let me move on. Mahatma Gandhi was sure that he would make no compromises with certain things. And as we repeatedly know today, he was very sure that he would make no compromises with violence, with himself. He would never make any violence with. He was clear about that till the very end, when he was shot and killed. He said, "Here Ram," and died peacefully. He would make no compromise with violence. He was a man, when somebody became violent with him, would turn the other cheek. He would show his other cheek to those who beat him up. He would suffer blows upon him, and would not react to violence with violence. We saw that in South Africa. We saw that later here as well. But by the time he had received it, in South Africa, when he was still struggling to understand what satyagraha and non-violence was and learning from it, we see him uh, turning the other cheek, not once, not twice, but many times. And he was very sure that the end does not justify the means. The means should be as pure as the end itself. If freedom is what India wanted, if freedom is what India aspired for, then that freedom has to be won only through the right methods, the right means. And he said, and I quote, "If we win our freedom by violence and bloodshed, I want no part of it." Someone once asked him, I think it was a media person, "Can you use non-violence against a person like Hitler, the dictator?" And Gandhiji answered it very clearly. What you cannot do is to accept injustice from Hitler or from anyone else. You must make injustice visible. That's a message for all of us. You cannot accept injustice from anyone, whether it be Hitler or a tyrant or a dictator or anyone else for that matter. You must make that injustice visible. And when he said from Hitler or anyone else, I think to me that phrase, anyone else, is extremely important. Hitler might be long dead and gone, but remember, all around us, there are still many petty Hitlers. In the 2020s, when petty, tuppenny tyrants are springing up all across the world, some of them even democratically elected, Gandhi's call, we must take Gandhi's call very, very seriously. It is relevant today in the 2020s and beyond more than ever before, that we should not take injustice from anyone else. That is most relevant today as it was many, a century and a half ago. Not accepting injustice did not mean, of course, that for Gandhi did not mean violence in any way. For, again, I would quote him, he said, for this cause, the cause of India's independence, I am prepared to die. But there is no cause for which I am prepared to kill. He would himself die, but he would not raise an arm against others. I think that's very important for us. For this cause, I'm prepared to die, but there is no cause for which I'm prepared to kill. Today, the world seems to be going the other way. Today, we hear people say that they're prepared to kill for their cause. So it's very important for us to understand that not accepting injustice does not mean violence against the perpetrators. It means meeting injustice with justice, violence with non-violence, himsa with ahimsa. That's a message he gives, because ultimately the truth will triumph. That's what he fundamentally. So long as you keep your course, so long as you're not distracted, so long as you don't compromise, that goal that you set to achieve through non-violence will be achieved. Gandhiji's message that there can be no compromise of violence and injustice is a message, therefore, to India today and to the world, today and tomorrow, and to the world well beyond, in the 2020s and beyond. In a world that's going berserk with violence across space and time, all across the world. I mean, I don't have to name the countries where there's violence today. Violence in deeds, violence in thought, violence in action. There are so many of them. It is very important for us to remember the message of the Mahatma. And in our country today, when women and young girls and children are being raped and gang raped almost every day, when girls and men and women, girls are being murdered, when the weak are being marginalized, when the helpless are being lynched and killed, I think we should remember Gandhi's message more than ever that injustice should be exposed, that we cannot compromise with injustice. It's time to heed the Mahatma again. In a country, in a world where violence has become the norm, where oppressors would like to say, like General Dyer said in 1919, I want to teach them a lesson. That's what he said when he was being court-martialed. I think Gandhiji's non-violence as the most practical response to violence should make us pause and think. But remember, ultimately, General Dyer, who wanted to teach India a lesson, his goal seemed hollow. For less than 30 years, actually 28 years after 1920, after General Dyer wanting to teach India a lesson, India was free. The British had to leave the country. That should make us understand the transient reality of the power of violence. It should make us pause and think. Violence or the power of violence may seem insurmountable, but it's transient. It can be pushed aside like a anthill by by non-violence and truth. Violence and killing and rape and lynching and murders does not teach anybody any lesson. It only teaches the perpetrator the futility of violence, the transitory nature of power, the transitory nature in which you can hold someone else in fear. That's transient. So Mahatma Gandhi was very clear about what he would not compromise. He would not compromise with injustice. He would not compromise with violence. And he would not compromise with evil. That's again a message to India and the world. Gandhiji's message, and he was that he would not compromise with evil. And he saw the British Empire as a colonial oppressive empire, as an evil empire. And he would not make any compromise with that evil. In 1929, therefore, during the Lahore session of the All India Congress Committee, I think that was where, I'm not sure, but Gandhiji was presiding. Gandhiji set his vision very clearly. No compromise with evil. No compromise with an oppressive British regime. No compromise with a colonial regime. And he said that the goal of the freedom movement, the goal of the Congress Party, the ICC then, was Purna Swaraj, full independence. Till then, the talk, the discussions were going on in sharing power. The British would hold foreign ministry and army and this and that, and Indian would hold education, and Gandhi said no. The goal is very clear. No compromise with evil. Purna Swaraj, full independence, is the goal. There were many of his detractors who said, how can we have complete independence from the British? That's impossible. You're ruling the world. Your empire, it's an empire where the sun never sets. We have such forces, the army, the police, to oppress us. But Mahatma Gandhi's goal was very clear. His means was also very clear. No compromise with evil. And for him, as we all know, to all of us, the British Empire at that time represented evil. Colonialism represented evil. And there could be no compromise with evil. And come to think of it, The AICC session was in 1929, and by 1947, in a mere 18 years, less than the ages of many of those who are, most of us who are listening in today, in just than 18 years in 1947, India had won its independence. The British had left India. So that goal that he had set, that uncompromising goal of not compromising with evil, led to that goal that he had set. It's a lesson for all of us who think that the evil in the world, that the strength of the oppressor is so entrenched, and therefore we cannot end that regime, that evil, that thinking. And we try to make these little compromises with evil. Gandhiji's message to us in the 2020 and beyond is make no compromise with evil. Evil will reign only so long as we compromise with it. We do not have to fear. We do not have to fear that we are weak and they are strong, the oppressor is strong. We do not have to think that they are rich and we are poor, that we cannot. There's a sentence in the Bible which goes something like this: small flocks, flocks as in flocks of sheep, do not be afraid. And that applies to all the oppressed. We may think we are small, we may think we are weak, we may think that the people who support us are few, but small flocks, do not be afraid. So long as the truth is with you, the truth shall set you free. Satyameva Jayate. Evil will end if if we do not compromise with it. And that's what Mahatma Gandhi said. If we do not give in, if we stand our course as he did in 18 years, Purna Swaraj is what India attained. We can also attain our just goals. So as I said earlier, peace was a weapon to the Mahatma. And his greatest weapon was that where there is injustice, where there's evil, I always believe in fighting, he said. Again, those use of words, words, negative words brought into a positive, into positive meaning. When all over the world peace is seen as a weakness, when non-violence is seen as a weakness, Gandhiji used peace as a weapon. He used peace to fight, again within inverted commas. He used peace as war, again within inverted commas. When all over the world people compromised with evil, made little adjustments here. Okay, what is wrong with that? Let's survive, let's live. He said that non-cooperation with evil is a duty, is a karma, is something that we have to do. And these words resonate to us across the world today. When we refuse to speak against evil, when we cooperate with evil in little ways, we are not following that path that Gandhi had set for us, which Gandhi showed can win ultimately. The way of the truth is always one, and I'm repeating here what I said earlier, Satyameva Jayate. It's been shown repeatedly. Look at Hitler, look at Mussolini. Look at all the great tyrants of the world. Look at all the petty dictators. Mahatma at the same time was one who believed in the rule of the law. He strictly obeyed the law of the land, and even if it is an oppressor's law. He obeyed the law of the land to its letter. And when his conscience refused to allow him to follow the law, and he resorted to civil disobedience against the law, he fully accepted it. But when he fully accepted the punishment for it. He did not break the law and then avoid the punishment. He broke the law knowingly, consciously, deliberately, and equally consciously, equally knowingly, equally deliberately accepted whatever punishment was accorded for it. So he was ready to break unjust laws and suffer punishment for it. We have so many examples for it. When the British imposed a tax on salt, he walked 240 miles, some 384 kilometers, to break that evil law, that unjust law. He walked all the way to Dundee on the Gujarat coast and broke the law because he believed that the law was evil. And then accepted the punishment that the breaking of the law entailed. And that was always the case. in every time he accepted that punishment and went to jail for it. Going to jail. I wonder how many of you listening to me have ever gone to jail for a day, for a lockup, even under our Indian or Indian systems of lockup and jails. I hope none of you have the occasion to go to a jail, even for a day. It's a jail is an oppressive place. You can't meet anyone. I mean, you were there. Gandhiji spent 6 years in jail. Nehru spent 9 years in jail. Imagine spending a week in a jail, a month in a jail, a fortnight in a jail, a year in a jail, 6 years in a jail. And Nehru spent 9 years in it. And every one of our freedom fighters, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Abdul Kalam Azad, everybody walking in Gandhi's footsteps, spent years in jail. In times of COVID like this, we can't even think of sitting for 1 month in our homes without meeting our other people. Imagine them spending 9 years, 6 years in jail. 9 years is as much time as half your own. Many of you listening to me, your life, or 1/3 your life already. But he was prepared to do that because he felt that if he broke a law, then he should equally suffer punishments for it. And it is this years in jail that has acquired us our freedom. So when you say, when you say, and when you do it, that we must not compromise with evil, we must break unjust laws, we must equally be prepared as non-violent practitioners to accept whatever punishment the regime puts across to us for that. That's part of the message of Mahatma Gandhi. That's what really Gandhi therefore asks us to do in this modern world in the 2020s and beyond is Gandhi forces us to ask questions about ourselves. Gandhi forces us today to ask these questions to ourselves. Today, when we identify ourselves, when I say Gandhiji asks us forces us to ask questions, I'm moving on to another aspect of his message, another element of his message. He tells us to ask questions for ourselves. Today, we all identify ourselves more as Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Sikhs. We identify ourselves as white or black or brown, as Malayalis or Tamils or wheat eaters or rice eaters, or somebody who wears a dhoti like I do, or somebody who wears a pajama. So when we identify ourselves like that, putting ourselves into smaller and smaller and smaller compartments, and looking at everybody else who's different from us as inferior, as not as good as us, Gandhiji shows us the opposite. He forces us to ask ourselves, if we are just that, am I just a Christian or a Hindu or a Muslim or a Malayali or a Tamil or a person who eats rice and wears a dhoti? Aren't we something beyond just Hindus and Muslims and Christians and rice eaters and wheat eaters and Malayalam speakers and Tamil speakers? Yes, we are, and that's what Gandhi tells us. And that's applicable across the world. It's not applicable not only in India, but across the world. He famously said, I am a Muslim. And I'm quoting Gandhi here. He said, I am a Muslim. I'm a Hindu. I'm a Christian. I'm a Jew. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Jain. Most of all, I'm a human being. And that's what we are all. That's what we all are. Are we not all that? Are we not? Isn't there an element in us which is part Hindu, part Muslim, part Jew, part Jain, part Buddhist, and above all, a human? That is what Gandhi forces us to ask ourselves. And the answer is very clear. Yes, we are all that. We are not just one. We are not part of a small compartment. We are part of a larger human entity that has, through evolution and otherwise, come down to us from, I don't know, 14 billion years ago when the first Big Bang created the world. And I think 3 lakh years ago when the first human beings walked on this earth. There are various elements to it. They're all interconnected in one body, which is the message of Gandhi. And one other thing that he showed us, and which is so relevant today, when we go around looking at people as our enemies, he told us that it is not the enemy that we should destroy. What we should destroy is the enmity in them. An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. It is not Hitler that we should destroy. It is Hitlerism. It is narcissism. It's fascism that we should seek to destroy. Not the person, but change the mind, the concept, the idea. It is hate that we must destroy. It's not the hater that we must destroy. I think that's an amazing lesson that he teaches us. And we often confuse hate with the hater, which is not true. There is there are many aspects to a person, and we must differentiate between the hate in a person. And he has got and every hate a person who hates God has got also tremendous love in him. So we must differentiate the hate in a person from the person himself. Let me move on. We are speaking of democracy. I think this is Mahatma was a democrat to the core. We today often, unfortunately, confuse democracy with majority. Democracy is not merely majority. That is something Mahatma Gandhi taught us again. Democracy, and that is true all across the world. Democracy is far larger and broader than a mere majority because majorities can be transient. The majority today would be different from the majority tomorrow. Yeah, and it does not matter whether the majority is a 51% majority, a simple majority, two-thirds majority, three-fourths majority. Democracy, the way it's practiced across the world, let's understand what Mahatma taught us, that democracy is not the rule of the majority. Democracy is a rule of all the people, of everyone, because ultimately, in a country, in every country, all across the world, I think, even in monarchies, the people are sovereign. Sovereignty is with us, the people. I don't have to explain this to you. Democracy, the word demos, comes from the Greek word, which means the people. So it's a people who make democracy what it is. Demos does not mean majority. Demos means all the people. Unfortunately, however, many of our democracies have become majorocracies. I can't think of a better word, which is a rule by majorities. But democracy, to Gandhi, and in truth, implies rule by all the people. It may be perhaps a rule because of the need. 130 crores of people can't rule. So it may be a rule perhaps by a representative majority, but it is still a rule of and for all the people. It may be a rule by a majority within inverted commas, a representative majority. A representative majority, unfortunately, always represents a minority. Even if, for example, I'm using the Indian uh, system as an example, even if a government during an election or a party or a group of parties get 35% of the votes and therefore gets a three-fourth majority in parliament. Remember, 65% of the people have not voted for that party. So a majority in parliament, a representative majority, always represents a minority of the people of the country. And therefore it is, even though a majority might rule in a representative system as we need to have, it is still, it has to be a rule of the people and for all the people. That's very important. I might, a group of 100 people might rule, but it has to be a rule for everybody else. It may be a rule I'm repeating that it may be a rule perhaps by a representative majority, but it is to be a rule for all the people. That is the democracy that Mahatma Gandhi was speaking of. He was not only speaking of that, he was actually practicing it, where whoever may be ruling the country or the state, persons temporarily vested with such temporary transient powers to govern should rule for all the people. That was Mahatma's understanding of democracy, which he so well put into practice. He was always therefore willing, as a true democrat, I mean, willing might be the wrong word. He was actually prepared to bend over backwards to accommodate views that were different from his. Even when he knew that an overwhelming majority of Indians, 30, 70%, 80% of the country held his views, he was willing to accommodate that 20 or 30%. And today, across the world, we see people who represent 20 or 30 or 35% trying to strut about the political stage as though they represent 100%. For Mahatma, it was the opposite. Even when he knew very well that 70, 80% of the country of Indians followed him, were with him, he was still willing to the very last to accommodate that 10%, 20%, 15%, because for him, as a true democrat, a democracy was a rule, was a system that took into account everybody. So he bent over backwards to accommodate that small group so that no one would be left out of democracy. Democracy is a rule where nobody should be left out. It's not merely a rule by a majority. Majorities can be transient. Today, a majority would vote to the left, tomorrow they would vote to the center, tomorrow, day after, to the right. It might change. It does not mean that when somebody votes for the left, the rest should be excluded, or when somebody votes for the center, the left and the right should be left out and ignored, or when somebody votes for the right, the rest should be voted. It's transient. You rule for 5 years, you rule for 10 years, you rule for 15 years, and somebody else takes over. That's what an election does. So even when you have a majority, and I think that's very important to understand Mahatma's understanding of democracy, you rule for and on behalf of all the people, and that is what democracy means: rule for the people, for everyone. So it's very important to encompass all the different views and opinions of all the people in formulating policies and laws and programs. Is something that Mahatma Gandhi uh, leaves us with, the understanding of what democracy is. Because ultimately, sovereignty lies with the people. It is not merely the sovereignty of the majority of the people of a country, it is sovereignty lies with all the people of the country. And therefore, even in the worth, at the risk of repeating, a transient, temporary ruler or a ruling group in a representative democracy has an imperative to rule encompassing all the views. Otherwise, it is not democracy. That was very true. I mean, some of the initial governments, I would particularly point out to Jawaharlal Nehru. When he was the prime minister, he tried, perhaps following Gandhi's model, tried to accommodate every view that was available in the country. In fact, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the founder of Janasangh, was a cabinet minister in his first cabinet. So democracy really is this is Mahatma Gandhi's understanding, and that is true not only of India; it's true all over the world. I mean, it's happening across the world where where governments elected with a majority of 20 or 30 or 35% or 40%, or 40% is rare across the world, behave as though they represent that all the 100% voted for them. They didn't. The majority in a democracy votes against the government in power. It's only a small minority that is. So every government in a democracy, in a representative democracy, fortunately or unfortunately, is a minority government. Let me move on. I think so. The freedom that we are enjoying, not only in India or across the world, is a freedom that was given to us by the Mahatma. It's a freedom that was possible only because of this great soul. Across the world, Gandhi was an inspiration to freedom movements. What happened in India was replicated across the world. Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and nations across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, if they're free today, and if they threw out oppressive regimes, they did so because they followed Gandhi's quest for truth. They followed Gandhiji's peace as an instrument of war through meeting himsa with ahimsa, violence with non-violence, with not cooperating with injustice, with not cooperating with evil. At a time when petty tyrants, many democratically elected and others claiming to be elected, choose to inflict violence on their people across the world, or even worse, stand by and look aside when violence is inflicted on their people by others and don't react to it and don't stop it, then it is a time to remember Mahatma. Because he taught us what democracy is. He taught us that you have to fight against injustice. And we must, as he did, we must say, as he did, that we will fight injustice, that injustice cannot be tolerated, that violence will be met with a non-violent struggle with fight. Mahatma Gandhi threw out the British so that we may be free. And we are free, of course. We are politically free. And now I'm speaking specifically of India. We are politically free, nearly 1947, nearly 73 years of freedom, an amazing achievement. But then freedom has to be, particularly democratic freedoms, have to be continually safeguarded. You can lose your freedom in a trice. Freedom is always under attack. As Jawaharlal Nehru once said, our freedom is in peril. Defend it with all your might. A century and a half after Mahatma Gandhi was born, we have to remember that. Freedoms are always in peril. You and I have to defend our freedoms with all our might. We must protect the freedom that the previous generation has bequeathed to us. You and I were born after independence. We have been bequeathed a free country or free countries across the world. And now we have a duty, a karma to protect that freedom and pass it on to future generations. The sacrifices, the 6, 9, 10 years of jail that Mahatma Gandhi and others underwent should not go in vain, so that we lose our freedoms and we are not able to pass on to our future generations what was bequeathed to us by our forefathers. We must protect that freedom for our future generations. So, just as Mahatma Gandhi and the freedom struggle encompassing all sections of Indian society, keeping nobody out, a democratic freedom struggle, just as they threw the British from India 73 years ago, today we must throw out a few things from our country. In 1942, as I said earlier, Mahatma Gandhi and the freedom movement started the Quit India movement. And within 5 years, the British had quit India. Today, we have political freedom, but there is poverty, so much of poverty amongst us, so many poor living amongst us. COVID has made things worse. People without jobs, unemployment rising, people committing suicides, farmers not sure how much money they can get for their produce. Mahatma Gandhi also said that poverty is the first form of violence. Violence can take many forms. Poverty is a form of violence. So there's so much poverty here today. And unfortunately, to add to that, there's so much of corruption today. There's terrorism today, violent terrorism. There is so much of communalism today. There's so much of casteism today. There's a lack of cleanliness today. There's a lack. So today, as we remember the Mahatma who has born 150 years ago, I think there's a need for a new Quit India movement. And there's a need for us to start a new movement, a new Quit India movement. This is, of course, not a political movement. It's a movement to 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 cleanse us of all that has crept into our polity, into our life, into our culture, into our society over the years. And so we must say today and declare that poverty, quit India. We cannot have poverty. Poverty is a form of violence. We cannot have poverty amongst our men. So today, I think we must take a firm resolve that as, as we as we observe the 150th year of a man whom we can't believe lived in flesh and blood on this earth, who walked in flesh and blood on this earth. The resolve we must take is to say, quit India again, poverty, quit India, corruption, quit India. Corruption has been sort of weakening India down the decades. It's a part, seems to be a part of our life so much. So we have to steadfastly say, corruption, quit India. Terrorism is taking its toll, and there are many forms of terrorism. We should say, terrorism, quit India. One of India's continuing evil is casteism. The feeling that I am of a higher caste, you are of a lower caste. I am a Varna, Savarna, you are not. You belong to a lower caste, you belong to an outcast. Casteism, we must declare, quit India. And communalism. You are a Hindu, I am a Christian, he is a Muslim, we are different. That communalism is a poison that's growing again in our midst. We must resolutely declare communalism, quit India. Corruption, quit India. Terrorism, quit India. Casteism, quit India. Communalism, quit India. Poverty, quit India. I think that is on this day when we are celebrating or observing Mahatma Gandhi's 150th or 4.5 centuries after his birth. That is the message, and that's a message. When you say quit India, I use that term in a narrow sense. It's applicable right across the world. It's applicable to globally as much as to India, and it is applicable to the 2020s and beyond, to everybody. Poverty has to quit the world. Corruption has to quit the world. Terrorism has to quit the world. Casteism and communalism, color and racism. It may not be casteism there, but communalism exists. And color and race exist. That is also to quit the world. So on this day, I'm concluding on this day, when we are thinking of Mahatma Gandhi and that strong message he gave us, let us pledge this day to follow the path that Mahatma Gandhi has shown us. And with him, let us say that we will make no compromises with poverty, make no compromises with corruption, with terrorism, with casteism, with communalism, with color, with race, with greed, with oppression, with injustice. And that is, I suppose, the best pledge we can take on this day. Let me conclude. Thank you for listening to me. This Mahatma Gandhi is therefore a national and a global icon, not a century old, but is a national and global icon for the 2020s and beyond. Jai Hind, Jai Insan, Jai Insaniyat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph sir, for this valuable session. And thank you for sharing the messages of Gandhi and relate his ideologies with present scenery. And I am so sorry for that. There was a problem in audibility in starting. Then this is the time to ask questions and sharing your opinions related to this topic. If anyone want to ask questions, please unmute your audio and ask.
Hello, good evening, sir. Hello,
Yes.
I'm Maria, a
Can
student
you
of
can you
political science.
identify yourself? Who is speaking?
Yes, yes. I am Maria, student of
You're a student of political
political
science.
science. So my question is
A student of,
political science
right,
department of.
Maria, go ahead.
Yes, yes, sir. My question is, what would be the influence of Gandhian ideas
Right.
on post-COVID programs, especially the formulation of policies after the COVID? And what is your opinion?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria, for the question. Um, Unfortunately, COVID, uh, not always, but I suspect, is being used at times to the fear of COVID, the need, therefore, to stay away from public areas to is being used for greater uh, oppression of people. It is being used to bring in heavy-handed uh, decisions, which, if there were no COVID across the world, governments would not have dared to take. But under the cover of COVID, laws and implementation of laws are taking a turn towards towards the negative. That is a sad situation that's arising through COVID. That's injustice. That's evil. And were Mahatma Gandhi alive today, he would have resisted it. He would have fought against it. He would have used nonviolence and peace to fight against it. But that's happening all over the world. I mean, COVID is being used to put down uh, people's aspirations, people's desires to come out, and that should not happen. So, from a from the point of view of COVID, I think it is an unfortunate time because the cover of COVID is being used for purposes other than what's strictly uh, applicable to COVID. Uh, I hope, therefore, like everyone else, that we find a vaccine for it soon, that we are able to find solutions for it, that the spread of COVID would come down greatly, and we will be able to uh, move out from this, you know, situation where COVID might, as time goes on, if it doesn't find a vaccine and we are not able to get out, can be used more and more as a tool of oppression. That should not be allowed to happen. Um, COVID is also a time. I mean, I'm moving away from a Gandhian, but it's also a time as an opportunity to rethink the ways we have lived in the past, to look at the way we uh, the consumerism and the runaway consumer. I'm not against consumerism. Everybody should, but, but Mahatma Gandhi's idea of a self-sufficient community, maybe a self-sufficient village may not be so applicable today, is a time to rethink and reevaluate our approach to spending. I think I think at least in India or at least in Kerala, we saw a period in the last 10 years where it was an unbridled sort of uh, spending, unbridled social opening up, things that we had culturally over thousands of years held to be sacrosanct were thrown to the winds, are being thrown to the winds. So perhaps the earth was being, environment was being shattered, overused. So perhaps if Gandhi were alive today, he would look upon this as an opportunity and tell us and tell us to rethink the way we do things, rethink the way we consume, rethink the runaway way we produce and wanted and unwanted. Maybe cut down our wants and look at it. I'm not. I know there's a limit to cutting down wants, but it can be a time to reflect on how uh, we could we could evaluate how we have lived in the last 10, 20 years, and make the world a saner place to live in, a less greedy place to live in. I think this is what Gandhi would have told us in times of COVID. Thank you so much for the question, Maria. I don't know whether I've answered you, but I hope I have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
And dear
Samini.
listeners, if there is any questions or opinions that you want to share here, please do it. Please unmute your audio and please ask or share your opinions.
Sir, myself Renjita Rajan, final year PG student, Sri Kerala College. So my question is, Gandhi as a national leader who stand always the welfare of Dalit community. But in India, the majority of Dalit community face a lot of challenges in the recent case also. So in this context, what was the what are the relevance of Gandhian ideas or Gandhian ideas for overcoming these challenges faced by the Dalit community?
I think Gandhi's message was very clear. I think for him, the oppressed, the weak, the marginalized were the most important in his life. I think I don't remember the exact words, but he said, if you have a doubt in your mind at any stage, try to remember the face of the most poorest, hungry man that you met. So whether it's the Dalits or the hungry and the poor and the weak, he would have stood by them and he would have been a beacon of hope for them. And in his absence, now that he's dead, I think you, Ranjita, and everybody else, you have a responsibility to carry that forward into 2020 and beyond. You cannot, you have to, oppressing Dalits or anybody else is evil. You can't make compromises with evil. You have to stand up for it. You have to draw that line. It's not enough to remain silent. It's important to speak up. As he said, injustice should be exposed. When he was asked about Hitler, his answer, which I said, injustice has to be exposed as injustice. So it's very important that we should stand up for people who are oppressed. Take a stand and speak about it. And for young people like you, Ranjita, and everybody else, I think you have a duty to do that, a karma to do that. Because as I said earlier, a previous generation bequeathed to us, and to some extent we bequeath to you, a free India. Now, if you are not able to do that and hand it over like we received it and we gave it to you, if you're not able to hand that over to your children, then what was the use of Gandhi? Gandhi would have been, all that he did, all the years that he spent in jail would be irrelevant. So you have a duty to do that. And you have a duty to speak up for injustice where you see it. And that's true of every person, young and old, not merely young. When that happens, you have to speak up for it, speak up against injustice, against evil, with non-violence. That's very important. But Gandhiji never, moved away from his path of non-violence. So that's very important. Speak up and acting against oppression, whether it's Dalits or any other community, through non-violence. Showing the other cheek, meeting himsa with ahimsa is very important. And his message to you, Ranjita, and everybody else listening to me, youngsters and others, is that you have a duty on this day to pledge yourself to carry that forward, to speak up against injustice. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but there it is.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Please ask your question.
Good evening, sir.
Right. Good evening.
Uh, Myself, Navya BK, student of Sri Kerala College. My question is the Babri Masjid verdict in line with Gandhian philosophy and ideology, sir?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. You must. I've not read the judgment, so I really wouldn't be able to answer it. From a legal point of view. But one thing is very clear that destroying a mosque or a place of worship, whether it's an Islamic place of worship or a Hindu place of worship or a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist, that's not done. It's wrong. Uh, it's evil. Let's make no compromises about what it is. It is evil. Uh, and what happened on the 6th of December 1992 was evil. And that evil has to be resisted non-violently. Because today, a mosque can be destroyed in India. Tomorrow, a temple can be destroyed in an Islamic country. A pagoda, a Buddhist pagoda can be destroyed in a Christian country. Is that what we want? No. So destruction of a place of worship, destruction of anything is unjust. It's evil and has to be resisted. I have no doubt about that. It has to be exposed as injustice. Who did it not, is not something for me, I was watching TV on the 6th of December 1992. I'm going into a personal anecdote. I was in the UN then, I was in Delhi, and one of my colleagues had come down for work from Geneva to come down to Delhi to look at some work. And the previous day, December 5th, her name is Michelle. She was asking me, about this. They're saying that Babri would be destroyed, Masjid would be destroyed. And I told her, no, that will never happen in India. India is a country of Gandhiji. It's a country of peace and non-violence. There might be a lot of slogan shouting. There might be people who will express their thing, but don't ever think that the mosque will be destroyed. It will never happen. And the next day on 6th December, this conversation with her happened on 5th December. She was in Delhi at that time. She had come on a mission for a week or so. And the next day I sat in front of the TV and watched this. It was disconcerting to see. Everything that the Mahatma had given us was being broken down. It was being broken. Each brick that was destroyed was a destruction of the soul of the Mahatma. It is evil. I'm not going to question whether the Supreme Court was right. Whether the CBI court was in it, or the special court was right or wrong. I have not read the judgment. But the point is that should not have been done. And as the Supreme Court said in its judgment, which I remember about a couple of months ago, they said that was wrong. It was destruction of the mosque was wrong. And that's correct. Who did it? Who did it not? Was there a conspiracy? Are things which, I'm sure, to a man like Mahatma, would be relevant, of course, but he would have looked at the larger picture. He would have looked at the soul of India that had been crushed when the mosque came tumbling down. That was wrong. It's wrong. The same thing can happen anywhere in the world. A temple can be destroyed in a Muslim country. A temple can be destroyed in a Hindu country. A mosque can be destroyed in a Christian country. Buddhist. It's wrong. There's no compromise about it. So that's my take on it. I don't know whether I've been able to answer your question again, Navia, but yeah. Evil should be exposed, and as Mahatma said, you should fight evil, non-violent. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As you shared as Gandhi's principle, there is no need of compromise with the will, and we don't want to fear to protect freedom, and it's our duty. Okay. Then anybody else to ask questions or sharing your opinions with us, please.
Right.
Hello,
If there
anybody?
are no other questions,
Yeah.
yep.
Joseph sir, please.
Yes. Are there any further questions or?
Sir, anybody want to ask questions? Arun sir?
So I think some questions are already raised, and
Yeah.
so let us time to wind up officially. Before that, on behalf of the Department of Political Science, express my special gratitude to M.P Joseph sir. His words are very inspiring and thought provoking. Now I over to Sri Rega for okay.
Okay, and I want to inform that all are requested to join the next webinar, which is scheduled to be held on 9th October 2020 at 8 p.m. And the feedback form will share on that day, and a certificate also given to those who are filling the feedback form. And we value your esteemed presence. And once again, I thank Joseph sir for sharing with us these ideas, valuable ideas, and the participants uh, who participate in this program. And I would like to hand over the mic to Maria Sani for vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Respected MP Joseph sir, teachers, and all the participants of this webinar. Today, Joseph sir started with our webinar meeting with the Einstein's quotation on Gandhi. As generations to come will scarcely believe that such one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon the earth. These wordings itself prove that Gandhi is a national as well as a global icon for the 2020s and beyond. I do believe that all the teachings of Gandhi are in danger. Recent developments prove that. Therefore, it is our karma to protect them, especially the freedom, as Joseph sir cited. And then I am coming to my duty. And it is a very pleasure to have an appropriate person as MP Joseph sir to in this webinar meeting. And on behalf of Department of Political Science, Sri Kerala College, teachers, students, and all the participants of webinar here together, and on my own behalf, I extend gratitude to MP Joseph sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And then I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for Head of the Department of Political Science, Sri Kerala College, Pramod sir, and all the teachers of Political Science Department who have taken the initiative for such an endeavor, for providing us the opportunity to discuss our ideas with the MP Joseph sir. And finally, I also wish to express my gratitude to one and all who actively participated in the program. Thank you everyone. With this, I am concluding. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jehan. It was a pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you so much, sir. And it's time to wind up this program with everyone's permission. Thank you all.